Welcome back to the channel. I want to talk to you today about the Beckham story again because over the last couple of weeks since we last discussed it, it's evolved quite significantly. And honestly, I think people are still massively underestimating how commercially important this situation actually is and what we can learn from it. Because it isn't just celebrity gossip. This is becoming a really interesting example of what happens when a family itself becomes a commercial asset. And that's a very modern business problem. Now, obviously, none of us know what's happening actually privately inside the Beckham family. And this video is not about speculating on family relationships or trying to pretend that we know the truth behind media reporting. What's interesting though is the bigger commercial and legal issue that lies underneath all of this. Because over the last few weeks, we've now seen continued media coverage around Brooklyn Beckham and his wife Nicola apparently distancing themselves from the wider Beckham family. Growing discussion around the pressure of brand Beckham and Victoria Beckham publicly pushing back against claims that she and David were pushy parents. And wider reporting how commercially intertwined the family identity has become. And what I think makes this so fascinating is that this story is about exposing something businesses are increasingly struggling with in 2026. What happens when the people are the business? Because historically, branding looked very different. A business had a logo, a company name, maybe a founder attached to it, but now people themselves have become the brands, and in some cases like the Beckhams, entire families become commercial ecosystems. That's a very different thing, because the Beckham family is no longer simply a football family or a celebrity family. Commercially, they operate more like a luxury media brand. You've got fashion, skincare, endorsements, Netflix documentaries, hospitality, partnerships, licensing, sponsorships, social media influence, and enormous global brand recognition. The family identity itself has become monetizable, and once that happens, something really unusual starts happening commercially and legally. The line between private life and commercial life starts disappearing. And that's the key issue here. Now, one of the things being discussed publicly at the moment is this idea that Brooklyn Beckham allegedly wanted to move away from the expectations attached to brand Beckham. Again, we do not know privately what's true, but commercially, that idea is incredibly interesting because it highlights the pressure that can exist when somebody is not just part of a family, but part of a wider commercial machine. And this is where the story actually becomes incredibly relevant for ordinary founder businesses as well. Because we see smaller scale versions of this all the time. A founder builds a successful company, a podcast, a LinkedIn following, a personal brand, then eventually their identity and the company identity become merged together. Customers stop distinguishing between the person and the business. Initially, that feels incredibly powerful, and to be fair, commercially it often is. Founder-led brands tend to grow faster emotionally, they create stronger loyalty, and they build trust much more quickly. People connect with people. That's why founder-led content performs so well. But the downside is the business becomes vulnerable to the founder's personal life, reputation, behaviour and relationships. And the Beckhams are probably one of the clearest modern examples of that at scale. Because now, family dynamics themselves are becoming commercially relevant. That's the really modern and interesting part of this story. 20 years ago, a family disagreement stayed relatively private. Now, social media turns attendance at events, Instagram activity, interviews, photographs, public silence, and body language into a commercial narrative. And once commercial narrative exists, commercial consequences follow. That affects reputation, partnerships, audience perception, and ultimately brand value. And businesses are still not particularly good at structurally managing this. Because historically, the legal side of business was much more separated from human personality. Today, that's no longer true. Now, from a legal perspective, there are several genuinely interesting layers underneath all of this. The first is image rights. And people are often surprised to discover that the UK position on image rights is actually relatively fragmented compared to some other jurisdictions. There is no standalone single image rights law in the UK. Instead, protection is pieced together through trademarks, copyright, passing off, confidentiality, contracts, and reputation-based legal principles, which means personality-led brands often end up relying heavily on commercial structuring. That's important because once multiple individuals inside a family become commercially valuable in their own right, things become significantly more complicated. And you can see this already commercially within the Beckham family. David Beckham has one commercial identity, Victoria Beckham has another. Brooklyn Beckham now has his own public and commercial identity. Nicole Peltz brings another profile entirely. And once multiple public identities become commercially intertwined, questions start arising around ownership, control, licensing, endorsements, future brand use, governance, and reputation management. And honestly, I think governance is one of the most overlooked parts of founder-led businesses in general. Because most people think governance means boring corporate work. It doesn't. Good governance is really about what happens when humans stop agreeing with each other. That's the real purpose of it. And the reason these issues become so difficult in personality-led businesses is because emotion and commerce become intertwined. Now, obviously, the Beckhams are operating at a completely different financial level than most of us, let's be honest. But structurally, the same principles apply. We see founder businesses all the time where spouses work together, siblings co-own businesses, parents and children operate together, friendship groups build companies together, and everything works perfectly until relationships evolve. That's when businesses suddenly realise that they never properly separated ownership, control, IP, and governance. And because relationships felt strong emotionally, nobody wanted to formalise difficult conversations early on. That's very common. Now, another part of the Beckham story that I think is really interesting is the public conversation around authenticity. Because one of the subtle criticisms emerging in media commentary is this suggestion that the Beckham brand became too managed or too commercialised. Again, whether that's fair is completely subjective. But commercially, it raises a genuinely important modern branding question. At what point does a personal brand stop feeling authentic and start feeling corporate? Because audiences today are extremely sensitive to perceived authenticity, particularly younger audiences. And founder-led businesses increasingly rely on relatability, openness, personality, and emotional connection. That's a huge part of modern marketing now. But the moment audiences begin feeling like everything is strategically curated, the emotional connection can weaken very quickly. And honestly, I think this is one of the biggest challenges creator-led and founder-led businesses are going to face over the next decade. How do you commercialize personality without making it feel manufactured? That's not just going to be a celebrity problem anymore. That's now affecting influencers, startup founders, content creators, coaches, podcasters, online educators, YouTubers, and personal brands generally. And legally, the more personality becomes commercially valuable, the more important it is to properly structure things like ownership, rights, control, and governance. Because eventually, personal relationships and commercial interests stop being separate things. Once that happens, private issues can start affecting enterprise value itself. That's really what this story is exposing. The Beckham story isn't just about celebrity culture. It's actually a very modern case study into what happens when humans themselves become business assets. And honestly, I think we're only going to see more and more of this over the next few years. Because as businesses become more founder-led, creator-led, personality-led, that line between private life and commercial life is going to become increasingly blurred. And the Beckham story is probably one of the clearest examples publicly that we have seen of what that can look like when family identity, reputation, and business all become commercially intertwined. If you found this video interesting, please make sure to like and subscribe because we're going to keep breaking down the legal and commercial issues sitting underneath major business stories, celebrity news, and current events. Not just the gossip itself, but what it actually means from a legal and commercial perspective. And if there are any other stories or topics that you'd like us to cover, just drop them in the comments below. And if you're building a founder-led business, a personal brand, or a growing company and want advice around protecting your business properly as it scales, feel free to get in touch with the team at Jamieson Law. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.